Hello, everyone. Welcome to Adventures Required, playing tabletop RPGs in the era of social distancing. My name is Connor Murillo. I am your game master for this evening. I work at the Hoover Public Library's nonfiction department, and I've been playing tabletop games for about 10 years, most of which I've been running games as the DM or game master, what have you. Next slide. The first part of this talk is going to be on the audio-visual support of playing games online. As you know, we're in the time of social distancing, which means a lot of us can't hang out with our game groups. And the first part of reconnecting with everyone is being able to see or being able to talk with everyone. So I've prepared several different overviews of different material that you can use to connect with people. Next slide. The first one that I'll be going over is Google Meet. It's simple way to bring your group together. You don't even technically have to have a board with it. It has video cam and a chat box. You can share your screen. So if you have a bunch of pictures or if you've prepared some other material that you want to share with your group, you can certainly do so. Once the host invites everyone on, you should be able to talk, communicate, send different chat options. And really, if you don't have access to one of the virtual tabletops that we'll be going over later on, you can just use theater of the mind if you and your group are comfortable with that. It doesn't have a dice rolling app attached, though, so you would either need to open up in a browser like a dice rolling app or have your physical dice with you. It's a simple way to do it, and there are more advanced ways, especially when we start talking about the virtual tabletops. But push comes to shove, it's a good way to connect with your friends and even play some role-playing games. Next slide. The next one is Discord. Discord is actually what I use with my group. It's very similar to Google in that you can communicate with people very, very easily and in large groups. You have a chat option. There is video, but I normally don't use it just because it can kind of slow my internet down a little bit. But it is available if you want it. It works very well with different games. It was designed for like using it for raids and MMOs or multiplayer online RPGs. And so it works really well, especially if you're using Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, what have you. My group has been using it during this time, and we've had some pretty good success with it. It's free. There's a purchase version. You can pay monthly, I believe, but it's not necessary for just the simple version, which allows you to have multiple channels. So you can basically have a large group, break that into smaller groups. The type of games that I run are a West Marches type of game. And for West Marches, you have multiple DMs. You're all playing in the same world. So we have to have meetings, and sometimes we don't want players joining into those meetings on accident. So you can have a locked server that is only for the dungeon masters or the game masters. And then you can have channels for each of your adventures. Since I run multiple campaigns and multiple games, I can have one for my West Marches style game. I can have one for my personal campaign, so on and so forth. It's a pretty cool tool that is, again, free, which is always nice. Next slide. Next is Zoom. Zoom's free version is not great for playing any type of role-playing game. You're limited to 40 minutes per session with any size group. So it's good for like a quick phone call, but not so much if you're trying to have a prolonged session, especially if those sessions are upwards of 2, 3, 4 hours. Their standard version, however, is actually very good. You have voice, video, comment tools, screen sharing, all the works. You have a supported browser, and you can have a host that basically holds the meeting. If your group all chips in, $14.99 a month, especially if you have about 4 or 5 players, turns out it's not so much. If you split it. I would recommend the standard version if you're going to be playing, because the other versions are more geared towards larger businesses. So a lot of the tools that you're going to want, like I said, the video, the voice, and the chat options are all available for just the standard version. That, and unless you're having like a huge D&D game of upwards of 10, 20 people, you don't need anything larger than what the standard version offers. So it is a pretty good tool. I would say that the only downside is that it costs money, especially if you have Discord or Google Meets, where they're free, and the free versions work very well for what you'd be using it for. So Zoom is good, especially if you already have it for something else. But there are other options. Next slide. In this part, I'll be talking about the virtual tabletops that are available. Many of these have free versions. Most of them have paid versions. Some of them are one-time payment. Some of them are monthly subscriptions. But we'll be going over that in each of their slides. Now, there are a lot more than just the 4 that I've listed here. However, these are the 4 that I liked and that I have some experience with. So those are the ones I'm using. But there are many more out there if you want to check them out. Next slide. So first off is Roll20. Roll20 is what I use with my groups. And we've had fairly good success with it. I use the free version. With the paid versions, you get a lot more cool material to use, like more storage, dynamic lighting, shared rule books. You have character vaults and things like that. And they do have 3 versions that you can subscribe to, Plus, Pro, and then of course, the free version. The free version has limited storage, has limited free tokens, but they do have free tokens. But it does come with voice and video. Plus, you can go ahead and upload different tokens, maps, and things like that. The free version is really good if you already have a map maker. So if you want to draw a map and things like that, you can upload it to Roll20, and that's a lot easier than having to try and make something on Roll20. Now, with the Plus and Pro versions, when you have more storage and you have more access to their free tokens, at this point they're paid tokens, but more of their tokens, more of their pre-made battle maps, and things like that, it becomes a lot easier. Not only that, but dynamic lighting is a pretty cool mechanic. If you're going through a dungeon, and your characters only have lanterns, no dark vision, you can actually demonstrate that with that dynamic lighting. Or if they walk into a room and some lighting changes, again, dynamic lighting. It makes things interesting. It gets that immersion. With the free version, you do have the fog of war, where it blacks out the screen, so you can't see anything. And then you can slowly open up different sections, but it's not as fluid as dynamic lighting can make it. It does have access to the rule settings for Pathfinder, D&D, Savage Worlds, and a lot of the more played, I guess, game systems. But And that allows you to integrate your character sheets. So a lot of times what you can do is fill out the character sheet on their website and then access it to that campaign. The DM will have to allow that access, but then you can just click on your attack icon with your longsword, or I automatically cast magic missile, and it will immediately roll the attack dice and then damage dice, which is kind of cool. And you can do that with the free version. However, again, your storage on Roll20, or how much they're going to keep in their servers, is very limited compared to their Plus and Pro versions. As you can see, that the pricings are listed here. From $416 a month, it bumps up to $833 a month, and there's only subscriptions, so there's no one buy. I've really enjoyed using Roll20. It's been pretty straightforward. There is a slight learning curve in when you're trying to set up different battle maps, especially if you're trying to use their tokens. Also, they do have a fairly complex system if you're trying to use very specialized mechanics. It took us a while to learn dynamic lighting. A few of my co-DMs went ahead and got the Plus version, and they played around with dynamic lighting, and it took them a couple of games to get used to it. And it took me a couple of games to get used to playing on Roll20. But there are a lot of really cool guides online and videos of people walking through the Roll20 mechanics. So let's go ahead and go to our next one, I believe is Astral Tabletop. This is another very similar to Roll20 virtual tabletop. And this one kind of stood out to me, was a very specific mechanic that they offered. They still offer storage, tokens, integrated character sheets. You can upload your battle maps and things like that. But they added environmental effects. So you can choose whether it's raining, storming, snowing, and you can even have lighting. So if it's like a cloudy day compared to a bright sunny day, which I thought was really, really cool. And your screen will actually change depending on how you have it set up. This is also, so it has a free account and a pro account. The pro account is $825 a month, which again offers more storage, more environmental effects, an action bar where you can hotkey everything, and large storage space for uploaded character sheets and maps. The free account basically does everything except the more storage and the free battle maps and things like that. That all comes with the pro account. This one I haven't actually had a lot of time playing around with. However, like I mentioned earlier, those environmental effects really stuck out to me because it does add a certain level of immersion into your game. Especially for me, I have a really bad habit of saying, yes, it's a stormy day, dark clouds surround you, and your vision's impaired. 20 minutes later, they're in the middle of combat, and I completely forget that we're in the middle of a storm, and that can add some different, that it affects the rolls quite a bit. And it's nice to have a visual cue, not only to remind yourself, but to remind your players that there is a lot more going on in the battle than just the fighting. The next one, I believe, is Fantasy Grounds. And Fantasy Grounds is pretty interesting. This one does have a subscription, but you can also purchase it right out and no more payments after that. And I believe if you go through Steam, you can get a 4-pack. So you buy one, but it comes with 4 licenses for you and your friends. And your group will have to have licenses for this game. So unlike within Roll20 or Astral, one person just has to pay for the account. Then you can invite your players, and you go on their website, log in, and there you go. Fantasy Grounds, each of you have to have a license of Fantasy Grounds in order for it to work. they do have technically a demo version, but you can only play with one other person, and you have to play with someone who has an Ultimate account. So basically, someone who already has the Ultimate version can demo it for you, but that's it. Their standard version is just one payment of $39, or it goes to $3.99 a month. Ultimate $9.99 a month, or a one-time payment of $149. So it is kind of pricey, especially if you're wanting to get the Ultimate version, but you only have to pay that once. And another problem is a lot of your friends will have to get at least the standard version. So it can be a fairly intense, pricey, but it is an investment, and it does have some really, really cool mechanics. Unlike with Roll20 and with Astral games, Fantasy Grounds actually has every integrated rule books and campaign settings, preloaded maps and scenarios, where you basically just click on a button, drag and drop it into your map, and voila, you're running Rise of the Rune Lords, or you're doing Out of the Abyss. So there are... it's kind of cool that you can do that. And it's not just with D&D. You can also do the same thing with Pathfinder, Savage Worlds, Call of Cthulhu, and some of these other games. And all of their rule books and some of their pre-written scenarios are already integrated into Fantasy Grounds. Some of them you would have to buy. So like if you wanted to play D&D Out of the Abyss, you would have to pay for D&D, then you would have to get their Out of the Abyss book. With Pathfinder and Starfinder, a lot of their material is already open source, but if you want to use any of their adventure paths, you would have to pay for those. But everything is already pre-done for you. So it's a bit of a balancing game, and whether or not you particularly want to invest in that. It comes with a ton of free tokens. Well, they're not really free, but it comes with a lot of tokens, maps. You immediately can make your characters inside of their system. So again, you click one button to roll for perception, click one button to stealth. And you can also build your own scenarios and adventures within Fantasy Grounds. So they provide you with map making tools. And you can also just go through and be like, at this part, they're going to run into this encounter. You can go ahead and pre-make that encounter on Fantasy Grounds, just drag and drop it onto the map, and immediately starts that encounter for your players. So Fantasy Grounds, I would say, while being more expensive, does offer a very unique self-contained experience that Roll20 and Astral don't seem to do. However, Roll20 and Astral are a lot easier to get involved with. It's not as pricey. You can still play full adventures on Roll20 or Astral without actually having to pay anything. And for me, especially during this time period where jobs aren't guaranteed, money's not guaranteed, it's nice to be able to use something that's free to play my main hobby, Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, and make sure that you can still play with your friends even if you're on a budget. So each of them have their own little quirks, and I would say that there are a lot of pros to Fantasy Grounds, but money is always a iffy thing. It just is, especially since you would each have to buy a license, which means each of you would have to pay at least $40 to get into Fantasy Grounds. So there's one more I wanted to talk about, which will be Virtual Tabletop, or Tabletop Simulator, excuse me. This one is very, very interesting because it doesn't just cover role-playing games like Pathfinder or D&D 5e, but it also covers board games. So card games, Monopoly, chess, Scythe, things like that can all be played with Tabletop Simulator. However, it is a simulator. Once you buy the base game, which is $19.99 on Steam, you have very basic board games that it comes with. You can also purchase DLC board games that, again, are all pre-made. However, what really makes this interesting is the customization and the modding community that has kind of popped up from Tabletop Simulator. So you can go and find mods for all sorts of games, all sorts of board games, all sorts of tabletop war games like Warhammer 40K and things like that. You can find stuff for Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder. But if you want to roll or play a whole campaign or play a game in Tabletop Simulator, you actually have to create it. Tabletop Simulator is, as it starts off, especially if it's just a clean slate, it's just a tabletop, which means you have to go in and add all the pieces that you want. And then you actually have to control a hand that will roll dice for you, pick up different pieces and move them around the board. You still have to have your physical character sheet. There's no integration, no just clicking a button and it rolls the dice for you. You're actually going to have to. It's like sitting at a table, except it is a simulated table. But that also means there's a lot of creativity that can go into Tabletop Simulator. There's a lot of maneuverability and freedom that comes with that. It is going to be a unique experience, though. And it does require a lot of work. One thing that I've noticed when playing virtual tabletop games, compared to having people over at my house, having like a board with markers and I'm drawing everything out, is that it takes a lot longer to prepare for every session. For every session, not only do I have to make a battle map, create the outline for what they're going to be doing for this session. So even if it's something simple like go slay the rats at the bottom of the tavern, well, I'm probably going to have to make a battle map for the tavern, a battle map for their basement, and hopefully the players stay on target and that's all they do. But if they go off and they're like, well, we're going to go talk to person A, B, and C before we actually go kill the rats, then I may have to have some kind of map or some kind of icon for them to go do that. And it makes adapting to your players a little bit trickier when playing online compared to being in person. Because in person, I can just draw another square and be like, this is the tavern, this is a table here, a chair over here. And this, I'm actually going to have to build a map in some ways. I might have something already saved, I might not. It just depends on what's going on. So it does make it a little bit trickier to adapt. Going back to Tabletop Simulator, that means you would have to build everything beforehand, even more so than Roll20, Astral, even Fantasy Grounds. You're probably going to have to do a limited amount of work beforehand to even build like the town. But then you'll have the town and you can have those little those pieces and you can move them around, which is really cool. But if your group and you've only planned for that one town and they want to go to town B instead of staying in town A, you might have to think of something pretty quick, and you're not going to be able to adapt as quickly as if you were just playing at home. That being said, that kind of ingenuity, when you can create this world yourself, make it exactly how you want it to be, and really put in that detail, is pretty cool. And it does make that game, again, that immersion, even better. So yeah, those are the 4 virtual tabletops that I wanted to talk to you guys about. In the next slide, there's going to be some online resources that I found useful, especially when looking up how to use some of these platforms, especially with Roll20. It does, like I said, it does have a bit of a learning curve. Fantasy Grounds has a lot of mechanics to it, and it's kind of nice having someone sit there and kind of walk you through and show you how they've done it. For those of you who are just getting into this this hobby and you need access to rules, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition rules, there is a basic free version on their website of D&D Beyond. Pathfinder and Starfinder rules are open source. Pathfinder 1st edition and 2nd edition are open source. You can find all of their rules on Archives of Nethys, which is sponsored by Paizo, the company that hosts that created Pathfinder and Starfinder. XP to level 3, Taking 20, and RuneSmith are all YouTubers who basically specialize in talking about how to play Dungeons and Dragons, how to make your campaigns better, how to make different scenarios better, how to use different tools. What are some tools out there for DMs? I found them fairly interesting and helpful. I think a few of them do use some strong language, so do be aware of that. But they do have a lot of insight into the game and are a good resource to use. For the last bit, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to send them in. I can answer some questions now. If not, feel free to leave them on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook, and we can try and get to them as soon as possible. Either way, thank you guys so much for joining me for Adventures Required, Tabletop RPGs in the era of social distancing. It's been a really pleasure to talk to you. And I want to go ahead and thank also Justin Rogers, who did all of my tech support for this video. He's been a lot of help, and hope you guys stay safe and keep rolling those dice.